or something like that, or rains down stars. Those things are cool, but otherwise getting like a 57% increase to like status ailments is not really tangible. It's not very fun, and you may even forget about having it, and it may not even be a factor in your build ultimately when you go to fight the Night Lord, meaning that a lot of the loot just is pointless or just isn't very enjoyable to get. Now, I totally understand this criticism, and I think it's valid to some degree, but I also think that the meat and potatoes of From Software's, titles is the
villain.
combat,
I'm not
and
judging.
I think that if they made the loot so random and potentially game-breakingly powerful, that it would stray farther and farther away from the focus that is the Elden Ring core combat. The thing is, Night Rain already does stray pretty far from that core combat experience, where in the main game of Elden Ring, when you're fighting a boss, for example, it's really about learning the attack patterns, right? Knowing when you can punish, knowing exactly what its attacks are and how to avoid them, and the slow learning process that eventually you'll overcome it. In Night Rain, and especially in co-op, it feels that you can get to enemy encounters and just run them over by button pushing and in an optimal manner, meaning that you can essentially avoid engaging with the core combat and the boss's moveset entirely, and that is a factor here. I mean, there's some bosses and, at certain ruins and nighttime camps and whatnot that you really don't even need to know what the boss does. It's just about melting its health bar as quickly as you can and not really engaging with the boss itself. The major exception to this are the Night Lords. These demand that you learn their movesets, because not only are their health bars so big that you're not going to realistically melt them before you need to learn them, but also it's that the normal enemies in the game, and specifically the smaller POI encounters, these bosses you don't really need to engage with the same way you would in the main game. In fact, the big part of it is actually the addition of Surge Sprint, right? You can do this super sprinting mechanic, which makes you go much faster than the normal sprinting in Elden Ring, where you just hold down like your circle button or whatever, and this completely changes combat encounters with normal vanilla Elden Ring bosses as well, because those were designed in a way that your maximum movement speed in sort of these lockdown encounters was just your normal sprint speed, and that still kept you engaged with the boss's range and moveset, where in a lot of ways the Surge Sprint allows you just to completely outspeed certain enemies and not have to engage with their attacks at all. There's a lot of examples how I could point out Night Rain's mechanics specifically break a lot of the vanilla bosses on Elden Ring, but the point I'm making with all of this is that if they were to go even farther with cooler randomized loot and more powerful things, they would only stray farther and farther away from the emphasis on Elden Ring's core combat loop, which I think they would dispense of at their own peril. I totally get the argument. 4% extra stamina recovery speed is not exactly the most fun or exciting reward in the game, but at the same time, if we got some things that were so insanely broken or overpowered for your build in the game, the actual focus of the combat itself would cease to exist, and at that point it wouldn't even really be Elden Ring at all. I mean, I feel like they got in a good middle ground where it keeps the core combat mostly intact, but still allows for some fun things to happen and for you to feel overpowered on occasion. For example, on particularly lucky runs, you can have an amazing weapon coupled with a bunch of these passives that rain fire or, shoot down stars from the sky or whatever it is, and you can only these things at once, you feel like a walking pillar of God, right? That can be a lot of fun, but at the same time, it's subtle enough that you still need to engage with the core combat loop of Elden Ring, which if it didn't have that, then I don't know if I would be as interested in this game still. Now, speaking on the topic of replayability and loot and all of that stuff, one of my biggest critiques of this game is the lack of enemy variety, and I mean that in both the sense of the actual nighttime boss fights, but also just the world at large. As much as I love Limfeld, and I love the way that it can randomize and have different encounters and cameras and stuff, after you play for a couple of hours, you realize that there's only a handful of variations you can ever encounter. I mean, if you find a fire enchantment, it's only the main knights or the flame chariots, or if you find a holy ruins, it's pretty much always going to be Elden Ring. And the unfortunate part is, Elden Ring has so many enemy variations. So many bosses in that game, and specifically if we're reaching into the depths of even other Souls games, which they obviously do for the nighttime bosses, there's so many different encounters that we could have that would keep the game more fresh. You do fight the same enemies over and over again, and while that can be fun from the perspective of like trying to optimize that boss and, you know, annihilate its health as quickly as possible, there is some fun in that. You also realize that this is just a massive missed opportunity where you could have much more variety game to game. Now, I understand that from a game dev perspective, every single enemy they add and every single boss needs to be properly tuned for presents a whole new plethora of potential bugs and whatnot. So I understand from a development perspective, given maybe their budget or time, this is probably the maximum amount of enemies that they could realistically add. But I just imagine that if theoretically possible, we could have almost the entire roster of enemies from Elden Ring potentially, or even some more bosses from other Dark Souls games, right? They had this whole marketing push when the game was releasing that, oh my god, enemies from Dark Souls 1 and 2 are going to be in here. But spoilers, there's really only a handful from each game, right? I mean, in Dark Souls 1, we got the Gaping Dragon and the Centipede Demon. And in Dark Souls 2, we get the Duke's Dear Freya and the Smelter Demon. And look, those are fun, those are very appreciated, and I think it's enjoyable to play with them in a totally brand new setting that I never thought would be possible. But at the same time, I just wish we could have more from those games. And I think that being able to encounter almost anything from those respective titles would be a very exciting game, and it would force you to adapt and, you know, kind of learn your playstyle on the fly, because you never know what you're going to get match to match. A certain boss could have a particular weakness to a build that you were not prepared for whatsoever. But realistically, the main problem here is programming them and, you know, tuning them for Elden Ring specifically. And the thing is, Night Rain already kind of has a problem with this, specifically in a lot of the church encounters when you're fighting these guardian golems. I mean, they have a one-size-fits-all arena for a couple of different bosses that can be here, right? You can get like the Oracle Envoys, or you can get these guardian golems in this upstairs section. But if you've played this game enough, you realize that the guardian golem is not built for this arena. You'll weirdly like teleport around. You can get places where you'll knock down for a critical, but you can't even reach the critical point because he's laying on something. Like, the level design does not really work with these bosses in a lot of cases, and it's not exactly tuned for these, where in Elden Ring, every time you encounter a boss, it was much more carefully thought out of how it's going to interact with its surrounding environment. And so throwing random enemies and random mechanics in random environments is not exactly a recipe for success. Yes, it's easy to say that we all want more enemies and more variety in this game, but it's just not realistically possible to have every single enemy that's in this game. It would be amazing, but I just don't think it's going to happen. The other thing is that other than the procedurally generated, you know, areas and feel-wise, Limfeld itself doesn't really change all that much. Despite, you know, all of the replayability they tried to have with the randomization, it doesn't really change in any meaningful way, other than shifting earth rates, or basically like a totally different encounter that can appear in one section of the map. Now, these don't happen all the time, but you might start a match and a fourth of the map has this snowy mountain peak, or maybe it's this volcano, or perhaps this like shrouded city. These are essentially, you know, classic dungeons from Souls games in which you need to progress through them, and at the end you're going to get some kind of reward. It's almost like a little, you know, raid, and once you complete it, you will get a ton of really good and exceptional loot. But the shifting earth events, at least in my opinion, are not my favorite thing, only because when they appear, they essentially demand your attention for the entirety of the second night, and if there was something that you wanted to do in the world that you really didn't have time for in the first day, you pretty much gotta let it go, and the circle will always end there around that shifting earth event itself. So you don't really have any variation as far as like where that can go if there is a shifting earth active. But they're all individually interesting in their own right, and they do make a meaningful change to Limfeld. And they'll also give you unique rewards that are pretty much unobtainable through the regular portions of the game. So there is that kind of replayability in the sense that once you've done all of these shifting earth raids once, you've experienced what they have to offer in those traditional dungeons, don't really need to be played again. I mean, unless you necessarily want the reward that you get from it. But otherwise, you can just play normal Limfeld, and it's not really going to change other than the Now, in order to alleviate this problem, other than shifting Earths, there can be random occurrences through different characters or NPCs or even like mini field bosses. For example, you can have these giant bubbles that will overtake you, and then you need to fight Augur like as a field boss, and you'll get rewards for that if you are able to defeat it. Or, you know, other things like a random swarm of locusts can fly around and steal levels from you unless you kill the butterfly that's associated with it. So, you know, you can have these random field events going on, but some of them are very like run enders for no real reason. For example, the Equilibrious Beast, you can find him as a field boss, and sometimes if you get unlucky, he might just randomly take 30% of your health away. And if you go to try to fix this, maybe you don't have enough runes to, you know, pay it off, or if you try to kill him, sometimes he'll disappear into the storm, but when he disappears, he won't give you your health back. You're just permanently stuck with like 30% less health. That can be an absolute run ender for no real reason, but typically if you defeat one of these random encounters, especially getting invaded by Margit, the Fell Omen, mutant, this is a great one because
I fight for everyone.
Seconds before you attack. Get ready.
You know, there are times where you just gotta feel really bad for the guy whose job it is to deliver bad news to Vladimir Putin. And especially over the past couple of weeks or so, you gotta feel bad not just for that guy, but for his family, who is probably praying desperately right now that he can stay away from open windows long enough at least to get out of the country. And that's because over the past couple of weeks or so, Russia has gotten nothing but bad news. And not just the normal bad news of them getting decimated in pretty much every front on the war, but also really terrible news when it comes to Russia's ability to project power on the globe through the #1 tool they've been using throughout their war in Ukraine, which is their nuclear threats. Because over the past couple of weeks, Russia's capacity to issue nuclear threats has just simply been annihilated. It was literally just a couple of days ago that we were all talking about how Russia's nuclear fleet in the Pacific had been hit by tsunami waves, which appeared to have done rather critical damage to the facilities that house the nuclear fleet, and untold damage potentially to the fleet itself. When we look at satellite imagery of this base, we can see that the fleet was actually split in half, confirming that the base, even though it seems to be well protected, was in fact hit by tsunami waves, damaging not just the satellite imagery, but also a whole lot of other small things that are difficult to quantify, and that of course Russia will never release the details of. But in a series of events that would just be mind-boggling if it happened to any other nation on the planet, but that in a kind of a sad and funny way we've just sort of come to expect when it comes to Russia, this massive event now seems to just be a sideshow act, compared to what has happened today as I'm recording this video, where Ukraine has humiliated the Kremlin, humiliated the nation of Russia as a whole, and really decimated Russia's ability to ever project forces of nuclear power in the way they once had, by stealing the plans to Russia's top secret, world-class, top-of-the-line new nuclear submarines. Now, anybody who knows anything about submarine warfare knows that the entire purpose of a submarine is to shroud your country's most critical activities in a high level of secrecy. It's actually the entire point of having a submarine in the first place, where a submarine goes below the ocean waters where it cannot be easily seen or detected, giving a level of ambiguity as to your options and what you could do as a country, particularly with nuclear submarines. Without these traits, without secrecy, submarines are not much more useful than a surface-level vessel, a surface-level naval vessel, etc. And we've all already seen just how useful Russian Navy's surface-level vessels are, getting pretty much incapacitated completely in the Black Sea by Ukraine that does not even have a navy. If your submarines lose secrecy, what you have is a very expensive weapon, one of the most expensive weapons in the entire military, that has now basically lost its purpose. This is now exactly what has happened to Russia. as Ukraine has managed to get their hands on before these subs have even launched and gone on their first missions all the relevant information about these subs, making them basically dead in the water, and how Russia can remedy these issues, if they can remedy these issues. Ukraine got everything. They got everything from operational schedules telling them when and where the subs are supposed to be operating, and Russia now has to change all of those things. Ukraine got engineering reports about the status of the systems on the subs. They got schematics showing the detailed diagrams of specific systems on the subs, including the survivability equipment, and basically showing all the potential weaknesses of these submarines and how they can be exploited. But even more than that, Ukraine also got detailed information even about the crews of the subs. Detailed information all the way down to the fitness levels of individual members of the crew. And this is a catastrophic blow for so many reasons. For example, if we just look at the crewless piece of this equation, in any competent country, losing access to this information would probably cause them to seriously consider docking those subs until further notice. Because when you have people who have access to not just a couple of different crew members, but the entire information of all of your subs, you now have a huge amount of people that the enemy knows about who approach corruption, where these people can be paid off or motivated in a number of other ways to sabotage their own machines or to go against their comrades in any number of ways. This would be the case in any country. You don't mess around when it comes to nuclear assets. But it's got to be especially the case when it comes to Russia. Not only because, obviously, their nuclear subsystems have already specifically been infiltrated, and the enemy is doing who knows what in and around this part of the military, but also because we already know that the Russian military is extremely prone to corruption. Russia invaded Ukraine. We already saw how corruption largely caused them to basically fail in their efforts. Where men, in many cases, were equipped with fake gear and adequate supplies. At every level of the military, we had people doing petty theft, we had generals doing actual fake orders of equipment, so that the people who arrived at the front lines did not have access to the real gear they needed to accomplish their mission. And in a country like Russia, where you have previously been so thoroughly infiltrated, to know that the enemy is in your subsystems and probably doing the best they can to talk to and recruit every single member of your submarine crews, that has got to give you serious pause, and I would not be surprised if Russia had to postpone any operations they had planned for this new nuclear fleet until they can completely replace all of these crews. And even then, there's got to still be a question mark at the top of their minds. However, the good thing about a crew is that no matter how long it takes, at least you can theoretically completely change them. The same is not true at all about any...
The right heroes could make all the difference.
President Trump's special envoy to the Middle East met with hostage families in Israel this weekend. The Hostages and Missing Families Forum says that Steve Witkoff told them a ceasefire deal should be an all-or-nothing agreement, with all 50 hostages in Gaza being returned in one go.
Why don't they do that?
Protesters had gathered in Tel Aviv.
I don't know why Hamas doesn't just capitulate. I mean, there's nothing like this is a total winning. This is a total losing battle. Like, you're not going to win against Israel and the United States. It's not going to happen.
Coming in 30 seconds.
So, like, it's just every day they keep this going on, more people get killed, and it achieves no goal.
After Hamas released videos showing emaciated Israeli hostages still held in Gaza. A warning, these images are disturbing. This is a still image from the video. It shows one hostage in a fragile state. As ceasefire talks remain stalled, Palestinians in Gaza are facing a mounting hunger crisis.
Is there weighing the propaganda war? I don't really think that matters in terms of international politics. I don't really think it makes a difference. Like, just because there's a handful of leftists that are like hyper-focused on Palestine doesn't mean that they're winning this war and everybody feels this way.
Joining me now to discuss CNN Global Affairs analyst Kimberly Dozier. Good morning to you.
Let's start winning public opinion. Israel's hated. I think that Palestine is winning public opinion, but Hamas isn't. I think that's a very big difference.
With
Very
these,
big difference.
These
Huge
images,
difference.
why do you think that Hamas released them now?
It's a tactic to put pressure on the Israeli government to make concessions, because what's happened is the Israeli government and the White House together have decided to go with a more maximum pressure campaign instead of saying yes to some of Hamas's demanded compromises as part of this two-stage deal. The U.S. and Israel are now saying it's got to be done in a one-shot deal where Hamas agrees to completely disarm and all of the living and the dead hostages are turned over. Maximalist positions that have been met on Hamas's side by saying, no, we won't disarm. We won't disarm until there's a Palestinian state. So that's why Witkoff had to meet with the hostage families to tell them this doesn't mean
when we start negotiating with terrorists, you always negotiate with terrorists. Of course you do that. Like they say, it sounds good to say that you don't, but of course they do.
On their level.
And so this hardening on both sides, where does this lead? Talks broke down a week ago, maybe a week and a half now. Where does this go when you consider the pressures that Netanyahu is facing, not only from those families, but in his own government, from the president here in the U.S.? What's next?
I feel like a lot of the Western sentiment, the U.S. sentiment with Israel is that we don't want to pay for this. Like, we don't necessarily give a fuck necessarily about Hamas or, you know, we're not fans of Hamas. We don't like Hamas, but, like, we also don't like Israel either. Like, and it's a matter of, like, it's a matter of priorities, right? I mean, why are we investing in, like, getting involved in this when we have people that are like on food stamps here, right? Like that's the issue. Don't care. I think that's really kind of where things are going. We don't like terrorists, really? Yeah. What is the problem?
Well, in cases like this in the past, when you've got Israel and the U.S.
Civilians aren't Hamas, though? Nobody said that.
Playing the hard line, that's when you've got to have somebody else step in.
You made that
and in this case, we've got the Qatar and Turkey route together with Egypt. They're continuing to talk to Hamas. Hamas leadership went to Turkey for discussions there, trying to get them to reach some sort of compromise. You've also got another track, Saudi Arabia in discussions with Britain, the EU, Canada, to recognize a Palestinian state. So this is basically the carrot for the White House. Saudi Arabia is saying, if you want your Nobel Prize, if you want peace in the Middle East and to expand...
If Trump gets a Nobel Peace Prize, I cannot... Dude, if that happens, that is going to be fucking insane.
Abraham Accords, President Trump, you've got to back a Palestinian state, which the current Israeli government doesn't want. So that's the different tracks that are trying to break the deadlock.
Put some pep in my step.
Parties are hardening their positions, and for now, that means continued fighting on the ground. And with only maybe 30 trucks reported as having gotten in with aid over the weekend, despite Israel saying it's going to allow more aid in, that is just more suffering for the Palestinians caught in the middle of this on the ground.
And so, I mean, in my opinion, they're just getting killed. It's a completely asymmetrical war. They have no way of winning. There's not even a possibility. Like, even if they lose, even if Israel has bad PR, it doesn't really matter. Like, it's like, okay, there's a bunch of leftists that don't like Israel. Okay, who cares? It doesn't really make a difference. We got nothing to lose. They don't have, well, they do. Their lives. I mean, they could die. But, like, again, it's not about surrendering to religious zealots. Well, that's fine. I mean, you can say that. Maybe you're right. But either way, all I'm saying is, like, I don't see there being any good ending for them. Like, I don't see any universe where these people come out ahead at all.
So this meeting that Witkoff had with the hostages, their families, they report that he said that the U.S. has a plan to end the war and bring all the hostages home. Now, we follow followed up with his office to find out what's the clarity behind that.
Yeah, I mean, I think so too. I mean, like, it's just taking too long. Yeah, I think so too. And political support for Israel is becoming less and less viable. It's working ultimately, but at an enormous cost. Well, what I'm saying is that when Israel stops being supported by the United States, I think that Israel will probably turn up the heat. Because at that point, and I don't think it's going to happen either way, but what I'm saying is that I think that if anything is kind of stopping Israel from being more aggressive, it's probably the United States. That's probably the reason why. And the moment that they're off the leash and they can do whatever they want, I think this is over in a matter of weeks. How can they? Well, Israel has a number of like weapons and like technology, and also like, I mean, Hamas isn't like a hyper, advanced group of terrorists, right? I mean, especially with Iran, it's effectively disabled at this point. Like, they don't have the level of infrastructure and technology that Israel does. I mean, it's not even close.
To get more information, they offered none. How do you interpret that?
Well, we had one hostage family come out and give interviews this morning saying that this doesn't work for them, that the U.S. and Israel turned down the possibility of the two-part deal where at least some of the 20 living hostages that are thought to still remain would be let out, as opposed to all in one go. Basically, Witkoff was trying to tell the hostage families, we haven't given up on you. We're putting maximum pressure on Hamas to get everybody out. And you had families of, for instance, some of the
how many? 50 or something like that?
photos have been released saying they don't have a lot of confidence in this. At least if we're going with the other plan, there'd be a 60-day schedule and light at the end of the tunnel for some of the families. So a lot of frustration here from them.
I bet a lot of the hospitals are going to have to die. That's just the reality. I mean, if these people are, like, so this is the thing, right? If they are religious zealots, they're never going to let them go, and they'll probably kill them first. That's what I would assume is going to happen.
The UK, France, Canada now say that they will recognize a Palestinian state next month if the fighting has not stopped by then. Is that creating any additional pressure on either Israel or the U.S.?
It does send a strong signal, but when you talk to close watchers of the conflict, they say, if you want to hit the Netanyahu government, you've got to hit them with things like economic sanctions.
Would you support the U.S. raiding the compound to free the hostages? Yes, if they were American citizens. No, if they're not American citizens. I think that, if they held hostages of American citizens, then I would absolutely support them doing that 100%, because these are literal terrorists that are taking our citizens hostage. Like, of course we should do that. Like, you can't let that happen. But otherwise, no, it's not our problem.
Europeans do a lot of trade. They're Israel's largest trading partner, but they haven't threatened to touch that yet. And when you look at it from Netanyahu's point of view, he has to have his back against the wall to step away from fighting in Gaza. Because right now, he's got a minority government. Two major religious parties left his government over the summer, so the ultra-nationalists in his government are the ones holding it together. They want the West Bank and Gaza to be re-annexed by Israel. If Netanyahu is perceived as going against their will in any way, he's going to find himself with even less power and likely triggering elections.
All right, Kim Dozier, good to see you this Sunday. Thank you.
I think that's what it is. How do you feel when Americans go to war zones, they get caught up in a war? Would you not say it's fair to stay home and find another country to visit? I don't think they should have been there either, but at the end of the day, I mean, these are still our citizens, and if we can't protect our citizens across the world, then we look weak, especially when it's being done by a paramilitary terrorist organization. I mean, again, and it's also like, why would you put up with that? Why would you let this happen? They shouldn't have been at a concert? Yeah, definitely.
special envoy to the Middle East, meeting with families of the hostages held in Gaza. Steve Witkoff told the families his first priority is getting the hostages released all in one group. That's according to the Hostages and Missing Families Forum. As demonstrators protested in Tel Aviv, outrage has grown over the video of Hamas they released of one of the hostages. And we got to warn you that this video is disturbing. It shows one of the hostages in a very delicate state, clearly emaciated. We're deliberately not showing the full video, but his family...
Isn't it a surprise? Wow, I would have never expected that the terrorists are actually not treating the people that they're keeping as hostages very well. Can you believe that? What a shocker. Who could have expected this
image being released? CNN reporter Barbie Latino joins us now with more. So there is mounting pressure on the Prime Minister there to bring these hostages home. What do you know?
Yeah, you know, I mean, there are still 50 hostages, of which only 20 are thought to be alive. And so it's a very delicate situation. And you can just imagine the angst those families of those missing hostages, especially those who think their loved ones are alive, are going through when they see these images. Now, we've seen so many images of the starving children and the starving Gazans, and now to see this, it just puts added pressure both on the Israeli government, but also on the U.S. government, because a lot of people think that President Donald Trump...
I don't understand what Hamas is trying to do. It's like they're trying to make shit worse for themselves. As I said, I don't think that there's any way out for them.
They'll be coming in 30 seconds.
There's probably no way out. And especially at this point, because they haven't come to an agreement or anything like that, I think that there's no way that they come out of this without just being killed. That's it. Yeah, there's pressure. Yeah, they're buying time.
And I know that drives
yeah,
you
I don't
crazy.
think there's any way that Hamas comes out of this without their entire leadership and probably the majority of them being dead.
Trump does have some power to persuade Benjamin Netanyahu to do something. Now, Steve Witkoff, as you said, really wants to bring these hostages home. He met with the hostage families for about 3 hours on Saturday. He also spent 5 hours in Gaza on Friday, and he went to one of the U.S. Israeli distribution centers. This is one of these aid centers where so many people in Gaza have been killed and injured as they wait for aid. It's a complicated situation, but seeing this image of this hostage has made it a lot more painful for those families. Victor?
Understandably. Barbie Latino for us there. Thank you so much.
I feel like this is kind of what's going to happen, is that it's their only card. If they give them back, they're probably dead. Yeah, I mean, at a certain point, I could easily see them just straight up deciding that, you know what, we don't give a fuck, like, you know, whether you have the hostages or not, we're going to attack you either way. And there will be a tipping point for that happening. And when it gets to that point, like, I don't really know what's going to happen, but it is going to be very, very, very bad. That's kind of what I'm expecting is going to go. And give up and go back to the open air prison. The people have been oppressed for so long, they don't give a shit anymore now. Well, I think that that's not really true in a lot of cases. A lot of the people that are oppressed by them, yeah, obviously Israel are bad actors, but you have to keep in mind that the people that are living in Palestine are also being oppressed by Hamas. Like, you can't go and openly, like, criticize them. They went and they had a fucking a parade or something about how Hamas was bad. And then the person that was leading the parade got killed. Yeah, they voted Hamas. They voted Hamas 20 years ago. That doesn't mean that they agree with everything they're saying now. I mean, that's it. And so, of course, that's clearly a very, very big difference in what's being discussed. I would say it's a very big difference. As they just issued a warrant to arrest the Democrats? Yeah, I know, I saw that, and that happened earlier. Is there they're making? Well, I don't know. All I'm saying is that I don't see any world where they come out of this and it's not bad. That's basically what I'm trying to get at. I did say I would watch this in a couple of days, and that was a couple of days ago. I will look at this. This is insane. There's still some animosity. I wouldn't put a lot of stock in them supporting that stuff. And the reason why is because they're in a state where they're oppressed. It's like North Korea probably supports, you know, Kim Jong-un, stuff like that.
Now, a disappearing act.
The word tariff, properly used, is a beautiful word.
For close to 40 years, Donald Trump has been declaring his love for tariffs.
One of the most beautiful words I've ever heard. It's music to my ears.
But the way the US president has introduced his second-term tariffs has sent shockwaves across the world.
When I first saw that sign, I wasn't sure if it was real. It was just unbelievable. People weren't expecting those kind of numbers.
I just shook my head. My wife shook my head, and this was next.
There was a huge shock across the markets. Nobody thought it was going to be this extreme.
These tariffs were supposed to protect American workers and businesses.
The tariffs now have caused me to work 1 day a week, 2 days a week, robbing from Peter to pay Paul.
You have a lot of job losses, you get lower wages, you get higher prices, and you'll get no solution to the problems that these people face.
Donald Trump has announced over 50 new or revised tariff policies, causing chaos and paralyzing investment.
This is the beginning of making America rich again.
People don't feel confident about the future because the future is uncertain. We don't know if there can be high tariffs, low tariffs, or something in between.
There's only one way to get it. It has to be a bold, shock and awe move.
Four Corners has been on the ground in the US investigating the impact tariffs will have on Trump's heartland.
We would have been paying about $50,000 for the park, and we were going to be paying $84,000 for the tariff and fees.
And a trade war that could lead to even more global instability.
The Chinese have a lot more tools at their disposal to withstand the pain than the Americans do.
The worst case scenario is that it spills over from trade war into actual war.
Donald Trump has torn up the rule book in his second presidential term, defying the courts, the Congress, and the Constitution. But it was here on Wall Street that he met his match, when panic selling on the bond market forced him to pause his so-called reciprocal tariffs. So what next for Donald Trump's whiplash-inducing trade policy? Will he listen to those voices telling him that his tariffs are a colossal act of self-harm, or will he crash through with his protectionist policies that he says will make America great again?
On April 2, Donald Trump gathered steelworkers, auto workers, and other supporters for what would be one of the most momentous announcements of his second term.
My fellow Americans, this is Liberation Day. Waiting for a long time. April 2nd, 2025 will forever be remembered as the day American industry was reborn, the day America's destiny was reclaimed, and the day that we began to make America wealthy again.
Announcing over 180 countries and territories that would be hit by his so-called reciprocal tariffs, ranging from 10 to 50%, in what seemed like an act of vengeance.
Foreign leaders have stolen our jobs, foreign cheaters have ransacked our factories, and foreign scavengers have torn apart our once beautiful American dream.
President Trump bypassed Congress, declaring the trade deficit a national emergency. Long-time adversary Russia wasn't hit by a tariff, but long-term ally Australia was.
We have a trade surplus with Australia. We have a free trade agreement. Why? They are incredibly important national security partners. Why would they whack with the tariffs?
Senator, despite the agreement, they ban our beef, they ban our pork, they're getting ready to impose measures on our digital companies.
The idea that we are going to whack friend and foe alike, and particularly friends, with this level is both, I think, insulting to the Australians, undermines our national security, and frankly makes us not a good partner going forward.
In the week after Liberation Day, stock markets slumped.
stock market, suffering major losses on the heels of the president's tariffs.
The U.S. and indeed much of the world may be on a collision course with a recession.
A trade war escalated between the US and China, the world's two largest economies. Then, remarkably, a sell-off on the US bond market.
Once we started to see the bond markets start to rattle, that was really an indication that we're on the edge of a cliff.
Trump's tariffs had brought the world to the brink of a financial crisis within the first 100 days of his administration.
In 100 days, we have delivered the most profound change in Washington in nearly 100 years. I read.
It is almost unheard of that the safest asset in the US would be heading to a fire sale, and that unnerved the financial markets, the bond markets, the equity markets, and it would have been a disaster that would have spread very quickly to most countries.
Donald Trump used executive orders to introduce his radical tariffs and had a cabinet and a team of advisors that either agreed with him or buckled to his will.
The Trump administration operates much more like a royal court. You have a king, you have various concentric circles of courtiers around them, and everybody sort of shuffles in and out of the Oval Office, waiting to hear the musings of the king and just implementing.
Peter Navarro.
A key architect of Trump's tariff policy is his trade advisor, Peter Navarro.
Yeah, I think you folks just want to know if you can see my MAGA tattoo I got there.
There are days when Peter Navarro, who is a radical protectionist, perhaps the only economist in the world who agrees with Trump's idea of reciprocal tariffs, gets into the Oval Office and has the president's ear.
Tonight I'm here with you in this beautiful sea.
Navarro is a demonstrably uninformed guy. This is some guy who was unknown, who somehow got recruited by Trump in 2016 and really doesn't know how anything works.
Peter Navarro has also done time in jail as a self-styled martyr for MAGA.
Every person who has taken me on this road to that prison is a friggin' Democrat and a Trump hater.
He served 4 months for defying a subpoena from the House Select Committee that investigated the January 6 attacks on the US Capitol. With panic setting in on the bond markets, the Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick and the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent realised they had to get Peter Navarro away from the president.
So Peter Navarro was pulled to another part of the West Wing, and in his absence, Lutnick and Bessent, unannounced, unscheduled, went to meet with Trump. They told him why they believed he needed to announce an immediate pause and to change course, lest the economy fall into utter collapse. He agreed. Lutnick and Bessent waited and stood by him as he typed out a Truth Social post announcing the pause. And then Bessent and the press secretary for the White House immediately went to the cameras to announce it.
The backdown was portrayed as a masterstroke.
Many of you in the media clearly missed the art of the deal. You clearly failed to see what President Trump is doing here.
Donald Trump had now dialed back virtually all of his reciprocal tariffs to 10%, giving 90 trading partners 90 days to renegotiate new trade deals.
Well, I thought that somewhere in the world, jumping a little bit out of line, they were getting yippy, you know? They were getting a little bit yippy, a little bit afraid.
30 seconds before you
Navarro only found out after the fact, and he was shocked. It was a huge moment. It was a huge day.
Donald Trump's tariffs on China remained in place and had escalated to a staggering 145%. President Xi had retaliated with 125%, making it now effectively a trade embargo.
The battle starts in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All you need to do is capture the mission.
Molson Hart is one of the hundreds of thousands of business owners caught up in the chaos of Trump's tariffs.
We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. We don't know what's going to happen in the next couple of months. There could be shortages of certain goods, depending on how soon we make a deal, if we make a deal.
Molson manufactures children's toys in China and imports them to the US.
These are our plush animals that come from China.
When we visited his warehouse in Austin, Texas, the tariff on imports from China was at 145%.
So this particular container actually left Asia and got on the water a couple of days before the tariffs were implemented. Every production that we had in China that would have had to pay that 145% tariff, we stopped. Because 145% is just a massive increase of cost.
After the Liberation Day tariffs were announced, Molson needed to move quickly to shift his manufacturing base out of China.
I'm really tired, to be honest. I wake up in the morning and my routine is now like check WeChat for all the Chinese suppliers, check WhatsApp for all the Southeast Asia suppliers. Then I work the full day, and then at night it's back to the same apps every day, over and over. Why? We're trying to shift our production outside of China to Southeast Asia. It's enormously difficult. Like, it takes 6 months to a year to properly move production, depending on what you're making. Obviously, the more complex it is, the harder it is to do. In some cases, it's not even possible to do.
The US Toy Association says nearly 80% of toys sold in the US are made in China. And the industry is predicting price rises, supply shortages, and bankruptcies.
We've actually had to pause production in China. So at some point, we're going to start to face inventory shortages for some of the products that we make there. And a lot of these things are, it's still up in the air as to whether or not we'll be able to transition production from China to Southeast Asia before we run out of stock.
At the end of last year, Molson built a second warehouse to rent out to a manufacturer. But he can't find a tenant.
People don't feel confident about the future because the future is uncertain. We don't know if there are going to be high tariffs, low tariffs, or something in between. So that's the first kind of blow that was dealt to business confidence. The second is that all these importers need to get that extra money to pay the tariffs. And when there's less money to go around for things, confidence in business in general declines.
Farming communities are going to be hit hard by Trump's tariffs. Decisions made by the president are upending the lives of families who have relied on agriculture for generations. The tobacco industry dominated North Carolina for 150 years. Reidsville became known as the Lucky City, after the billions of Lucky Strike cigarettes that were made here. John Ash and his forefathers have a long history of growing tobacco in this region.
Not many families can say this, but black families that is, but we've been here for over 100 years. My great-grandfather, my grandfather on both sides, and my father were all farmers.
Like many farmers in this area, John relies on another crop, soybean, for his livelihood. A crop worth $13 billion a year in US exports to China.
I would say that 40 to 45% of my soybean crop is exported directly to China.
When we visited John's farm, he was sowing his first soybean crop of the season.
I'm gonna plant about 50% less than I would normally because I don't know what the price is gonna be. I don't want to take the risk of putting even more out there, and I'm cutting back. I'm just cutting back.
Soybean farmers were hit by tariffs in Trump's first term, which helped Brazil overtake the US as the world's largest soy producer. John is worried it's going to be even worse this time.
I'm concerned that they're going to find other places around the world that can fulfill their needs. But sometimes, you know, you find another grocery store you like, you don't go to your old grocery store anymore. And I'm concerned about that.
The tariff chaos means he doesn't even know what crops to sow.
You never know how to plan. You hear they got working on trade with this one or that one. Next thing you know, they're not working on trade with this one or that one. I've never seen